But I do want to start off before I talk about agility and ask a question. Because every organization thinks about this time to time. And what we find time and time again is organizations know the answer to the organization they need to be. They need to look at what the organization would immediately change if they were in a time of crisis. So if the US knew it was going to end up in a hot conflict with a period adversary in the next 6 months, if you think about your organization, how would it immediately change? Drop some of those answers in the chat. How would your organization change if we ended up in conflict?
Hey, Matthew, you're also not sharing yet, so let me know.
Yeah, I'll jump over in a sec. Focus on white warfighter tools. Awesome. What else would change about your organizations? What would have to change to develop new weapons and tactics? Thanks, Trent, for putting on the camera.
Mm.
And delivery product process would go out the door. Get rid of the red tape. Less IT security rules. So let me kind of start the presentation building on this exact question. This is something we hear over and over again. And what an agile organization really is an organization who can respond to real world change. And when we talk to organizations about what they would do in a time of crisis, they tend to know the answers. And the real question is, why aren't you that way now? And let me bring this a bit to life in kind of a non-defense construct. We actually got a phone call from Duke Energy a few years ago, and they were perplexed by this question. They had done a study, and it took, on average, 5 trucks going up at someone's house to put the power back on. Totally unacceptable experience. The first time, because they were in different departments, the power line wasn't powered down, so the truck got there and couldn't work on something. The second time, they would show up at 4:45, but their contract said they needed to end their day at 5 o'clock, so they just showed up and then left. The third time, they realized actually that's a different department. The fourth time, they were like, "Oh, we don't have a tool," and the fifth time, maybe they connected your power back to the house. That was how they felt every day. It's a completely absurd way to go about your work. But something happened 2 or 3 times a year. A hurricane would come up the eastern seaboard and knock millions of houses off the power line. And they could reattach over 150,000 houses back to the power grid a day. How could both of those realities be true? And we just turned that question around. What was different? What were they like in a time of crisis? They cut out all the bureaucracy. They focused on the number one thing, which was serving the customers and getting them back online. They actually changed their org structure and got rid of functional silos and set up by value streams. They got rid of handoffs. They actually gave much more responsibility to the teams. And you had leadership turned around thinking about how do we support the people to deliver, which then had them making breakfast. They would just field problems from the field. And their job was, how do I support the end delivery? The entire organization was flipped upside down on its head. And the first question we turned around, so why don't you just do that all the time? And their first response was, well, safety. Actually, they looked at the safety numbers. During a time of hurricane, safety improved because people were responsible for their own safety. You got rid of, oh, I just need to follow these stupid rules and I'll be safe, to we have less rules. We just have the critical ones in place, and you need to be responsible for your own safety. If you're responsible for actually making sure the power line's off at that house, you're not going to blindly touch a wire because you thought someone else did it. You're going to test it first. So actually, safety improved when they ripped out all the rules. The second complaint was, well, what is it going to do to employee motivation? Working that hard is really tough. Will they suffer burnout? No, morale went up in those periods because people were getting things done. So this led to a transformation for them. And it was actually titled, Why Can't It Be Storm Time All the Time? How do we take the best of what we are in a crisis and deploy that to have the focus of that type of organization in reality? And what we find is that's where a lot of organizations want to be. They know the answer, and make believe rules that they made up themselves are holding them back. So when we think about an agile organization, we shouldn't just think about agile teams. We need to be thinking about, how does the delivery model support what we're trying to do as an organization? An example of this in defense, and we bring this up a lot because we're seeing what an agile organization is, especially in the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine. This is a small agile outfit in Bakhmut. They got a phone call about, hey, we are having an issue evacuating wounded soldiers because we're putting a wounded soldier on a stretcher, two people are carrying it, and they're being attacked by drones. So not only have we lost one person, we're pulling three people out of the fight, and we're actually not bringing the person to safety. They engaged a defense contractor locally in Ukraine with not a list of requirements. They said, hey, I need to be able to get a soldier who's wounded off the battlefield successfully. That was it. They didn't tell them how. They didn't say, we need a machine that moves at 7 miles an hour, that only uses 1 gallon of gas, and 700 pages of requirements. No, they gave them a mission and they said, figure it out. The defense contractor came to the front lines. They observed, they saw what was going on. They went back to their workshop and they immediately pulled a prototype into the field within 3 weeks. They then tested and refined that. Within 2 months, they had two new products: a robot dog that could carry out a wounded soldier, and then they installed that dog with what they called a hammerhead backpack or hedgehog backpack, which was a 60K drone jammer. On average, it saved 50,000 lives. And we present this quite frequently and talk, what would keep the US from doing this? And people laugh. We're doing a lot of work on with the Department of Equipment and Supply in the UK. And one of the things that their vice chief of defense has come to saying is, the next war is going to be a war of one-day ideas. It's not going to who has the best technology when we go into the fight. It's going to be who has the best technologies coming out of the fight. We need to drastically rethink what that ends up looking like so we can turn a product from need to in the field in weeks, not years of building individual requirements. What does that end up looking like? So let's step back and see, based on our observations, what's actually keeping organizations from delivering in general, and then what is holding back software and agile delivery specifically within defense. So the first things that we see universally true across almost every organization we've worked with are these three things adding up to slow down the entire system. The first is being that most organizations have no clear prioritization. They have an organizational mission, maybe a vision, and then they have lots of tactics. The way that then flows through strategy, it gets completely lost. If you have every employee asked to do 7 things, every employee then is setting your organizational strategy because they're deciding which of those things to work on. The overload from the top of the system gets everyone focused on starting work instead of finishing work. We like to talk about, how often do you ask someone how they've been who you haven't seen in a long time, and their response is busy. We've all heard someone say that. If you haven't, you're lying. But have you ever actually asked someone how they're doing and they're like, well, feel like I'm just completing work at a sustainable pace and I'm getting a lot done? No. If someone actually said that to you, you would look at them like they were insane and probably not a person you would want to hang out with. But if we step back and think about that for a second, how is just saying I'm so busy, not getting anything done, totally socially acceptable, but saying I'm getting a lot of stuff done is not? Like something is totally broken with our frame of reference where busy seems to be the goal or we're getting done. And the last mega issue is our operating models and our structures are not designed for getting modern work done. How many people have been referred to, had an issue, and they've asked someone to help and they go, oh, go talk to blank blank. They're really good at navigating around the system to get things done. To me, this is also an absurd thought because the system is supposed to be enabling us getting stuff done. Like, why is that okay? That everyone is trying to work around the system instead of the system working for the people. That is the entire point of an organization and an operating model and a structure. We've almost come to this belief that the structure is an inevitable, it's like the rules of physics that can't be changed. That is not true. Those structures were put in place to help us do our jobs. If they're not, we should be challenging them every single day. This is universally true if it's defense, if it's research, if it's academia or private industry. However, there's some things that I think are completely unique when it comes to agile and defense, specifically within software. First, this idea of project versus product. This is really something totally unique to defense. No one in industry is buying software as projects, they're buying products. And let's compare the two of those. Products have fixed end dates where at the end the team disperses. The goal is focused on executing a list of requirements, and the core output is delivery instead of an outcome. If I'm selling you a product, it's a continuous thing. It's focusing on solving a very specific problem, and the core output is then actually solving that problem and then continuously providing new value as I go, not just contracting individual upgrades one at a time. One of the things that industry has figured out, and almost is universally true if you're buying it as a project or a product, is software is never right on the first usage. If we're buying it as a product, we're actually depriving us of the learning of that first deployment to tell us where we want to go next. If we're trying to do agile software development, but buying a project, you're almost in trouble before you've even begun. The second issue is just the idea of requirements to begin with. I, when we were looking at this, was reading a book about the Lewis and Clark expedition. Thomas Jefferson didn't actually engage Lewis and Clark and say, I want you to get to the West Coast. Here's every single requirement. You'll eat this much food. You'll take this river. You'll make friends with these Indians. No. He said, please navigate by water to the Pacific and then come back alive and try not to kill a lot of people along the way. That was it. He gave a very specific outcome statement because he knew the path to be able to accomplish this was very unclear. When we define how up front, we were guessing at the solution before anyone's done any work. We're dissuading people from learning as they go through the process. We're reducing the ability to simplify and drop terrible ideas that no one's even going to use. And we get what we wanted instead of what we needed. So as a defense, we need to stop pretending we can see the future, because when you give someone requirements before you start, you're saying, I know the future, which I'm not that intelligent. Maybe some people are. I think a real world example of this, we're working on requirements for the 6th-generation fighter in the UK, Project Tempest. And the running joke is it's going to have requirements for thrust to weight ratio in there. And they're going to invent a teleporting aircraft by that point in time that can just appear in places. And then some procurement officer is going to be like, well, it didn't hit its thrust to weight ratio. And then they're going to put a jet engine on it just to check off a requirement. Like, it's a totally absurd. This thing's not supposed to fly for 15 years. And we're guessing at a thrust to weight ratio. We don't even know if that's important. The next is this idea of passing risk versus collaboration. There's this idea, if we pass all the risk to the vendor and then build a wall, we'll be able to work better. It's a fundamentally flawed premise. I'm trying to do something for you as the vendor. Like, I want to work with you. I want to be able to get feedback. If I'm just passing risk to the other side and saying, go do this, please don't talk to me, It's a false construct is when they don't, there's some cost and then we end up having to re-engage. Second, you're not getting that type of agreement. And in many of these cases, they're charging you for the risk. So they're underbidding the first component and then trying to beat you on the change orders. And you just haven't set the relationship and based on trust into teaming. In the private sector, the exact opposite. When you're asking someone for help, you're actually entering a partnership where you're trying to solve the problem together. The idea of passing risk actually pulls the idea of a partnership apart right from the beginning. We need to be establishing a contract that brings us together with a shared goal and a shared incentive. And the last issue is we see someone telling someone they should be agile. I need you to do this in an agile way. I need you to deliver this, but I'm going to give you a waterfall contract. It doesn't make any sense. We were doing something with an organization on both sides. They were putting in an SAP instance and we were building a network around them. And we ran into this really funny issue where the vendor didn't want to put in the T&E module. The supplier, or sorry, the buyer didn't want the T&E module either. But they're like, hey, the supplier keeps working on it. And I was like, why? And they're like, well, there's a $50 million milestone payment. Well, of course, neither side wants to be doing this, but you are paying them to do it. You need to put in a contract that actually allows for the learnings to go. One side can't be agile, both sides need to be agile. We were dealing with an issue in one of the US testing ranges where one of the major primes called us and said, we're having all this issue with agile, blah, 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 blah. And literally the next day, the government side called us, we're having all these issues with agile, blah, blah, blah. What should we do? And we essentially just said, you two just need to talk together because the agile operating model needs to go around both of you. You guys need a combined solution, not individual solutions. You can't do agile opposite on both sides. So with that said, because I've used the word agile a lot, what do we even mean by agility? I'm actually convinced it's a word that almost is meaningless because it's so used. It's like, well, that's lowercase a agile. That's uppercase a agile. Like, if we could go back in time, we probably actually should define some of these things slightly differently. But let's actually break down this field a lot because I don't define Agile as doing Scrum or Kanban or XP or SAFe. Those are all just methods. But like, what is it? What is the intent of those things? The intent matters the most. Any organization that is adopting any sort of agility needs to start with why. What is the outcome they're trying to achieve? Almost every agile transformation I've worked on loses its why at some point. If it didn't have a why, it can't even maximize that. So you got to start with the outcome that you're trying to get to. That's what you should be measuring. You should not be measuring agile compliance. That is just a method to be able to get there. Organizationally, we believe business agility is one of the best ways to deliver most outcomes. But there's a series of different types of agility. There's delivery agility, which means, am I getting faster feedback loops? The best way to look at how to start that is looking at the Agile Manifesto. The second is organizational agility. How can I be a more adaptive learning organization? We believe one of the best ways to start that is looking at Scrum at scale. Then there's team agility. That's how can I get a high performing team? One way to start that is looking at Scrum. But we always put this out when we're engaging with customers to get them shifting their thinking from right to left. Oh, we're interested in Scrum. To be honest, I don't care. What are you trying to achieve? Oh, I want more organizational alignment. Then how is putting in a team framework going to give you organizational alignment? It doesn't make any sense. We need to get really clear on what problem we're trying to solve so we can bring the right solution to the table. The frameworks, the things on the right are never the point, they're the method to get there. If a plumber showed up at your house because you had a leaking pipe and just kept talking to you about the wrench that they were bringing to your house, you would throw them out. You would say, no, go fix the pipe. Let's talk about the pipe. I don't care about the wrench you're going to use to fix the pipe. To me, these frameworks are just wrenches to help us fix the pipe. Let's talk more about the pipe and less about the wrench. So this leads to the entire idea. When someone says, hey, I've been doing Agile, I immediately get concerned that they're thinking about Agile as the individual frameworks. What you want is someone saying, hey, we're being Agile. These practices are just ways to get us there. And when they mean by that, that's described by the Agile Manifesto and the 4 values, defined by the principles. These practices are there to help enable that. Let's not lose track of what we're actually trying to do. A lot of this actually just comes from defense. Jeff Sutherland, who invented Scrum, the founder of our company, one of the signers of the Agile Manifesto, was a fighter pilot. The underpinnings is defense. And the big thing that he was trying to bring to business operation is John Boyd's OODA loop. So for people who don't know, John Boyd is known debatably to be the best fighter pilot who ever lived. And he defined the best fighter pilot who wins the fight is the person who can observe, see what's going on around them, orient to what that means to them, make a decision, act, and then move through that process. Not the one who makes the best decisions, but the one who can go through that process the fastest ends up winning. All the Agile Manifesto is trying to do is actually deploy John Boyd's OODA loop in different ways within the organization at different altitudes, at the team, at the org, or the program level. How do I quickly observe, orient, decide, act, start over? It's very simple of actually what it's trying to do, but it's trying to systematize that into behaviors. If you haven't read the Agile Manifesto, which actually we run into people all the time, I'm doing Scrum. I was like, well, have you read the Agile Manifesto? No. Okay, so you don't even know what it's supposed to be unlocking. The thing that I come to while working with leadership a lot about the Agile Manifesto is there are 8 values: individuals and interactions over processes and tools. It's saying both of these things are important: working product over documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. I've evolved this slightly in my thinking, and I've talked to Jeff Sutherland about this. And one of my aha moments personally was actually the things on the right serve the things on the left. It's hard to have a working product if I do not have comprehensive documentation. It's actually pointless to have comprehensive documentation but not a working product. It just actually makes perfect sense. I can't respond to change over if I don't have a plan that I'm changing. There's no point to following a plan if I've learned something that it won't allow me to change. So these things actually work really well in conjunction. And I think the things on the right enable things on the left. If anyone ever says to you, hey, I'm Agile, so I don't have a plan, they've missed the point. It actually says in the Agile Manifesto, you need a plan. You just need to be willing to change it. And then these principles are important to think about, all right, how can I change my delivery? Some of these that I think are very hard, that defense almost universally, when we ask them the question, what will be the most value, is actually building teams instead of just individuals, simplifying things, so deciding what not to do, and making working product over a schedule the primary measure of success. But a lot of times we spend time with leadership just looking at these values and going, how would these apply? Let's spend less time focused on the how, but where are we trying to get to? Which of these are important? And then we can help you figure out the best method to be able to bring these to life. So as we then wrap up kind of our definitional phase of what is Agile, there's a couple pitfalls and misconceptions that I just want to call out. First is Agile is just about installing practices. No, we just talked about that. Agile is a mindset, it's an approach, it's how we bring things to life. Agile is implementation about changing culture. You can't change culture. Culture is a symptom of the system. If I have an issue with my culture, I need to figure out what is in my system that's driving that behavior and then change that. So it's about, how do I build a full structure? Agile is not like installing a software. It's not a one-time event. I'm putting out a North Star and I'm asking myself consistently, how do I continue to move in that direction? Where should I go next? We're seeing more and more organizations on the private side and the public side move into a continuous state of transformation. because the world's going to keep changing. So therefore, I need to keep changing. Let's not do major change program that may or may not work, most fail, and then the next one, then the next one. Actually, no, how do I do continuous incremental change to my own organization? And the last is team level agility creates business agility. It fundamentally doesn't. When we're working with organizations, then we don't measure process. We look at some of those outputs that then deal with the mega issues we talked about before. So what we measure is how well does the organization prioritize? How well can it go from strategy to individual team backlog? Second, how well does it focus on the customer? The customer is the one who's getting value at the end of the day. Therefore, we need to interact with them. We need to understand if we're providing value to them. If not, it doesn't matter. Then, is my organizational able to deliver with the right quality, with the right individual, on time, at the right point? The next, how well is then the organization structured to be able to support that delivery? And then finally, and what's very important is culture, but how are my method for prioritization, focusing on the customer, delivery, and org optimization, is that driving the culture I want? Because if I'm not getting the culture I want, I need to go back and look at the system to figure out what I need to change to then drive the culture that I'm looking for. I can't tell everybody to be nicer. I need to change the system that requires the behavior. To bring a real world example in there, we were working with a trading organization. They traded liquefied natural gas. They wanted a more collaborative culture. Their bonus structure was based on a logarithmic scale where they force ranked all the traders from 1 to 100 and then paid massively different bonuses based on individual contribution. So it actually didn't matter how well the organization it did. It just mattered how much better you did than the person to your left and right. And they go, why won't everyone be more collaborative? Well, because you're paying them not to be collaborative. If you want to be a more collaborative culture, look at the systems that are driving the lack of collaboration. It's your bonus structure. Let's figure out how to drive a bonus structure that drives the culture that we want instead of fighting the culture we want. So let's talk a little bit now about where Agile is in defense. I think what's really important to understand is Agile was born in defense. So we talked about Jeff, we talked about the OODA loop, but a lot of these other concepts also came. The entire idea of servant leadership was popularized by defense. How do we actually put someone there to enable the people to do their jobs? The entire idea of cross functionality, the way we operate in theater is this way. We're not set up in functional silos. We're set up in small units who have the capability to actually be able to execute their plan end to end. And then the entire idea of mission command is operationalized servant leadership. I'm giving you an outcome, not a how. You're figuring it out. And if you run into an issue, come back to me, and then I'll figure out how to provide the right support to enable you to get to that place. It's actually now about how do we take these very operational things that defense really understands and bring it into the way we deliver software. We're seeing more and more people at the top of an organizations. This comes from John Healy in the United Kingdom. He's saying, straight out, we want a leaner and more agile Department of State. We need to be focused on outcomes. Defense is mired in process and procedure. Everything is too slow. We're hearing the same thing from leaders across the US that they need to be more agile. They're lacking agility. How do we then drive that to action? Because words are not enough. We need to think about how do we change the entire delivery system to enable this? But the intent is absolutely clear. We need to be more agile and to be able to get there. And you're seeing this across all of defense. There's thousands of Scrum teams. We see this in kind of IT delivery spaces, but we actually know SEAL teams and other special forces teams that are operating this way. What we're seeing is now some upstream movement where whole organizations, so the British Royal Navy is looking to end move every sailor to a Scrum team. We've got other commands down at FRC East, in Wolf, and Now they're looking at, all right, how do we make our whole command system more agile? And then at the enterprise level, we're starting to see more and more pull. I think the UK is very much leading the way there, where we've talked about the Royal Navy, but the UK Defensive Equipment and Support, their strategic command, and their military strategic headquarters have all adopted agility into their operating model and how they operate every day. This also can be used for delivery. I think one of the best case studies out there of what an agile program looks like is the Saab Gripen. They adopted agility from the beginning because how does a small country like Sweden compete with the United States and the F-35? They decided they couldn't work harder, they couldn't spend more money, they needed to operate differently. So what did they do? They built an extremely modular aircraft. They work end to end, so cutting out any spending that was unnecessary. And we'll dive a little bit more into the how as we go through this. But their program to get the grip into life cost 15 billion compared to 70 for the F-35. It's cheaper to fly, and they're releasing brand new iterations every 6 months. And one of the things that I think is truly amazing is if they send you a new engine, it can be pulled out and replaced by one technician using one wrench. Because the whole thing is built like a thing of Legos. They understood that this platform was going to be in the air for 40 plus years in some of these countries. Therefore, the ability to upgrade it was its actually most important feature because they knew that change was inevitable. So let's talk about, all right, how does that apply to how we even think about programs differently? So what they did is the whole aircraft is built around stable interfaces between any of the components. I can change any of the systems without touching any of the other pieces because everything beyond all the systems are totally firewalled from each other. The entire, actually, if you went to where this was in Sweden, where we've been, everybody sat, the development team sat in one giant hangar. It was about 400 people organized in the shape of the aircraft. So people working on avionics worked towards the front. People who were working on the wings and design and armament sat in the wing area. People working in the engine sat near the back so they could see and interact with each other and felt every pilot or every engineer was a pilot. They gave them all flying lessons. Why? Because they had a digital twin to the aircraft. They could have a pilot or an engineer design something, put it into a digital twin, and fly it themselves within an hour. If that seemed to have a positive effect on what they were doing, they then could use 3D printers to print the product. Oh, by the way, this warehouse where they were all working was sitting on an airfield where they had fighter pilots. They then could put it in the aircraft within a week and fly it. One of the things that they had done was made the airworthiness tests so minimal, and they tried to pull everything out of that critical path where they could put those stuff on and not have to do airworthiness testing on every single upgrade. So they could get things through the development cycle faster and faster. They actually then would bring pilots from all the member nations in constantly and allow them to fly the aircraft. So they got really short feedback loops on what was important, what was not. And then because the entire thing was modular, they were able to keep changing this thing in and out. So the way we would summarize this to enable agile delivery is I need to be basing decisions on empirical evidence. To be able to do that, I need to deliver in frequent increments. To be able to take advantage of delivering in frequent increments, I need to collaborate with customers and suppliers. To be able to get the value out of collaborating with customers and suppliers, I need to make continuous improvement to what I'm delivering to take advantage of that. I'm going to skip through some of this to actually talk about then what this looks like. So in a traditional path, what you end up seeing, and this is of a perfect waterfall program, I have a start point and I'm delivering through fixed increments all the way through the program. What ends up usually happening is I hit an aha. Some sort of insight appears of what actually the customer really wants. But I'm like, well, that's going to be for the next phase. That's for the next contract. I'm still going to deliver you what you asked for in the beginning. I don't care about we have a much better idea now. And what ends up happening is I deliver my last milestone. I give the customers what they wanted, but what the customer needed was actually slightly different and up here. Oh, we'll deliver that maybe next time. We're going to go through another 2 years of contracting, and maybe in 10 years, you'll get what you needed. What Agile is saying is no, we're going to assume you don't know what you need. So I'm going to start delivering usable features or usable enough to be able to get feedback in increments. This allows me, because I'm getting things done quicker, to have my aha earlier. So then I can start building to what you need. What ends up happening, and we hear in defense, well, if we do Agile, we're going to have scope creep. If this is done right, you actually end up earlier because half the things that the customer thought was really important, they don't actually want. They don't actually need them. So you end up delivering what they need earlier because you've cut out all the unnecessary fluff. So if you want to look at Agile delivery, there's a few things that I would recommend doing. Is review your plans and look at how you can create faster learning loops, drive things to complete before starting new things, review the governance so you can actually incorporate learnings, reduce the level of planning of detailed requirements further out than you need to, and review planning government so it's easy to adjust based on learnings. To be able to do this, you need to systematically think through how you deliver. Let's now talk about organizational agility. What does that actually mean? What can that look like? So we also think about this as a principle-led approach. First, you need to make an organization that can ruthlessly prioritize and reduce context switching for people along the edges. You're trying to strategically align leveraging transparency. You can't empower someone to make decisions if they don't know what you're trying to do. So there's a nice linkage here to a lot of the empowerment pilots we're seeing. We're then trying to organize around value to minimize dependencies. People ask me all the time, like, what's the best way to manage dependencies? And my answer is to not have them. That we know is actually impossible, but actually we can design out a lot of your dependencies if you organize around values. So value flows vertically instead of horizontally across your system because dependencies kill programs. I'm trying to empower people with the best view of a problem to do the proper decision making. A lot of agilists will say, actually, you're trying to push it as low as possible, but there's a such thing as being too close to the problem to being able to see it. So we always say decisions should be pushed to the person with the best view. This increases the quality and speed of decision making. I have a process to surface and solve systematic blockers. And my operating model itself is dynamic and constantly evolving based on feedback. So what does this look like? So we find a lot of organizations don't spend a significant time focusing on their operating model. And when we talk operating model, organizations have inputs. So that's their strategy, mission, vision, et cetera. Their organizational inputs, that's people, money, contracts, et cetera. And then they have outcomes that they want out of the other end. So that's product outcomes, so quality, customer value, et cetera, or organizational outcomes, employee happiness, financial viability, etc. There's a piece in the middle there, which is your delivery engine. How do we take that systematic thinking that we put into our products and apply it to our own organization? And if we're looking at Agile, there's three things we're focused on to bring organizational agility to life. The first is having customer-driven organizational prioritization. How do I link mission, vision to strategy to what every person is doing in the organization? One of my favorite stories to bring that to life is it's debatably true, but it doesn't really matter. It's frequently said, but Kennedy was in the Houston Space Center and he asked a janitor in the bathroom what he was doing. And he say, Mr. President, I'm trying to put a man on the moon. And then was able to walk that linkage about why being a janitor in the bathroom was important to putting a man on the moon. That's the organization people want to work for. They want to know when they come into work how their job, what they're doing relates to what the organization is trying to achieve. One of the things that I think is a massive strength of defense is it's a mission driven. It's clear that's why people signed up, though we've sucked that excitement out of them because they actually don't know how their job enables the vision that it's supposed to do, or it seems so far removed. We need to draw that linkage. Second, we want to have systematic, continuous organizational improvement. How do I find issues at the edges that can't be solved at the edges and bring them to someone who can solve them? The organization should be working for the people doing the work to help them to be able to get there. So, how do we structure a process that's designed to do that? And then, how do I get to rapid incremental delivery to support that organizational iterative development that we were talking about in the program agility section? And that's just not a goal. I actually need to change my organization to be able to do that. I need to be more empowered. I need to be more cross-functional. I need to have financing that's incremental. So what do I need to do at the operating model piece to enable incremental delivery? It's not good enough to just say, I want to deliver in an incremental way. I need to think about, how does my operating model need to change to enable incremental delivery? This is not a one size fits all prescription. There is no paint by numbers organization chart that is able to get there. I need to think about, what are my outcomes and how do I structure my organization like a product to be able to deliver those outcomes? There's a lot of people out there looking for Agile in a box that I can just install like a software program and expect my organization to perform. It will not work. It may make you slightly better. It will not get you to your endpoint. I need to not think about, how do I just paint by numbers. I need to strategically contextualize a system that's going to be able to get there, and probably keep tinkering with it every week, every day, just like you would a good product development process. I need to ruthlessly attack bureaucracy. Every large organization gets more and more bloated as it continues to add rules and rarely is removing them. Therefore, we need to get to a minimum viable bureaucracy. And we capitalize viable because actually, if you don't have enough bureaucracy, the whole thing's not coordinated and falls apart. But you want to be at a place where every rule is fighting for its life for existence. What we find in many organizations is that a lot of the rules are make-believe. One of my favorite examples is this. We were working with the Royal Navy on this issue where they couldn't get enough qualified sailors through sea safety because actually two of their dunk tanks, where they would simulate a helicopter crash to get out, were down, broken, and one was decommissioned. So they had this issue where they were sending ships out to sea with not enough sailors because they didn't have enough sailors who had gone through the sea safety program who are currently qualified. As we started to look in, all right, how do we lean out this throughput? We were looking at the regulation, and someone goes, why do people have to requalify for sea safety every 2 years? It turns out from Parliament, the rule was 4 years, but someone at some point in the Navy decided that they would requalify people for sea safety every 2 years so they never ran afoul of the 4-year rule. This was a totally make-believe rule. The fix was easy enough. We could just go back to the actual rule, which was 4. We got into this absurd position where we were sending people out to sea on ships that were undermanned, that didn't have full watches. What is more likely? A ship suffers an incident because it's undermanned, or a helicopter crashes into the sea where people survive and then died because they didn't go through the sea safety training frequently enough? Like, what is a bigger risk? We're optimizing the system around the small risk instead of the big risk to follow a rule that fundamentally never existed in the first place. We just invented it. We saved over 20 million a year just by going back to the actual rule dictated by Parliament. By the way, then we went to Parliament and said, why is this every 4 years? And they moved it to, I think, every 8 years outside the first time you get through sea safety, because it didn't make any sense. What was the bigger risk? So what we try to build is two very specific cycles into the process. So for anyone who actually understands Scrum really well, what we try to do is actually scale the product owner cycle. So same thing, just bigger. Instead of one product owner and a team, We now have a chief product owner overlooking multiple teams and a chief product owner to follow that lingo over multiple scrum of scrums, and you can keep going up. I need a very clear linkage from the center out of what's the organizational priorities, what's the next level down priorities, or the next level out, what's the next level out, and how do I systematically string vision to what everybody's working on and back up and have a system to be able to do that incrementally. Second is scaling the Scrum Master cycle. How can I quickly identify things that are getting in the delivery team's way? If they can't solve it, try to solve it more locally. If they can't solve it, try to solve it more locally. We were working with the EOD Mobile Unit 2 and their new captain, as he came in and took over that Special Forces group, young captain, said, please never bring me a problem that you don't have a solution to. And he went back to his office and thought about it for a second. He's like, that is the worst thing I could have possibly said today. That ensures all the hardest problems I will never find out about because they don't know the solution. He then brought actually an all hands back together the next day and said, guys, I was wrong, which rarely done by an officer. If you have a problem that you know the solution for, just go do it. Please bring me all of the problems that you don't know the solution for so I can work with you to find a solution or go up and out of the organization to go solve those. Complete mindset shift of what the role of an officer was. And it dramatically accelerated the group and changed everything. That is what we're looking to systematically do within an organization. Right now, again, kind of going back to the Royal Navy, this business on the top of my mind, they can go from teams in one of their outstations to the first Sea Lord, who's the best job title there is in all of defense. That's the 4-star that heads the actual Royal Navy. They can get from an individual team to the first Sea Lord, no matter what rank you're in, within 2 weeks of a problem by looking in it. They now judge each level not by how many problems they raise, but by cycle time. If you've sat on a problem for more than 2 weeks without pushing it up, that's when you get in trouble. You don't get in trouble for pushing something up. And they've been managed to rapidly accelerate the way they remove impediments. What this can look like, going back to Saab, is Saab really took this lesson to heart. Each team had their daily scrum at 7:30 in the morning. Then they met, so if that was a team working on the air intake on the jet, they would then meet with the entire propulsion team at 7:45 to review any impediments that they couldn't solve at the team level. Then the Scrum Masters got together of the entire engine group at 8 o'clock, which then may have got to a higher level Scrum of Scrums at 8:15, and then got to the CEO of Saab's desk by 8:30 every single day. Within 1 hour, every single problem that could not be resolved got to the CEO's desk, and that became the backlog for the CEO that day. This made them significantly faster and a rethinking and a way to systematize servant leadership. So if you're interested in an organization, where to start? First, define what agility means and what you want it to unlock. You need a clear case to change and what I'm supposed to be using agility for. Identify then what the system needs to create an agile environment. Establish clear organizational prioritization. And with that, I mean things need to be clearly defined in what is done. Just like how a story at a team level, if I'm now working at a release schedule, those things need to be able to be done. So we're working with the Command and Nav Air right now, and they've adopted a 6-week release cadence. And one of the things they're learning, it's very hard to say what done is, but that's where the value is. So I not only need to have prioritization, I need to clearly say what done is, and then I need to create a path to identify delivery impediments and then provide assistance for delivering those. So I'm going to talk just quickly on what team level is agility before shifting to talk about the path. So team agility, the first thing is I see a lot of defense go wrong because they've not understood what an agile team is supposed to be in terms of what is the definition of a team. An agile team needs to be like a football team where the team win and loses together. You don't have a lineman who's really successful and the team sucks. Like the lineman wins because the team wins. We see a lot of agile teams that are more like a track and field team, which like, well, I won the 50-meter dash. Oh, the US high vaulter vaulted. Like, oh, it's great. The US didn't win the combined over all track and field medal game, but like that's not really my interest. If you just staple together a bunch of SMEs who have their own individual paths to production, that's not a team. They're not operating together. So if you're going to adopt any agile practices at the team level, it's really important that they're an actual team. And that team is defined and is stable because like no professional football player is on 5 teams part-time. No, they're on one team and they work and they learn together. We need a team. Then with that team, we need to do a lot of the same thing. This is a replay to the org. So let's talk about what we need to do on the team. I've got a missed slide here. I need to have someone who's clearly in charge of prioritization. I need to have someone who's looking at making that team operate really well. I need to have that team continuously reflect on how they can be better. And it's all the things that we think about. If you just step back and said, what are the 5 things a good team would need to do? We need to bring that to life. And I'm going to spend the last couple minutes here then talking about the journey. Like, what do I want to do if I want to get to an agile organization? We think you need to look at 3 different levels. First, I need to think about the ecosystem. What is that environment agile teams are going to live in? And how does that environment, how is that optimized to support those types of teams? I need to then train, coach, and contextualize those teams so they can work and take advantage of that environment. If I just have an environment and no one knows how to use it, not helpful. If I just have a lot of agile teams who know what they need to do, but the environment is fighting them all along the way, not helpful. I need to combine those. I need to do those at the same time. And then I need to create a way to sustain that over a long period of time and help continuously make it better. So I need a dynamic playbook. I need internal capacity to be able to coach and work with those teams to make them better over a period of time. There's no shortcuts to be able to get there. A couple of things that I want to call out is you need to have a clear business case of where you're trying to get to. Like, what are your outcomes? Your outcomes are not agile. If you're aiming for agile, you're wrong. I need to execute and enable. I need to actually deliver the transformation in an agile way. So, what are my goals for the next 6 weeks? What are the goals for the 6 weeks after that? And use a learning cycle to build that environment over time. What is next? What should we try to do? I should also always pair training with coaching. Actually, the Defense Acquisition University is asking people to stop doing agile training as a standalone thing. It's actually making employees less happy. They're all excited, and then they come back into their environment and they have no way to deploy and use it. I need an end-to-end system where I've given people the training and then help them contextualize it and have the system around to support it. And I need to then create the sustainability so the transformation doesn't stall. I need the proper change communication. This is no different than any other normal change program. And I'll end here on, all right, there's 2 things then we do when we're working with organizations. First, I go wide. I want to set up the top layer of the organization to be agile. So that's that prioritization body, that continuous improvement body, supporting continuous improvement. And then I'm standing up individual areas into that environment where I'm learning from each micro transformation to the next. I don't try to take the whole organization and try to transition it overnight, because what you're doing there is taking a waterfall approach to your agile transformation. It fundamentally doesn't make sense. I should actually take the concepts of agility and deploy them into how I'm doing the transformation. We're getting more and more actual requests to, I'm not doing an agile transformation. I want to do a transformation in an agile way. Because transformations are one of the most complex products that you could possibly putting into market because it's using humans and humans are highly variable.